Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tithe Podcast, a podcast about sowing and reaping. And today we are going to review what happened in the previous episode and kind of see where it's going to go from there today. So we laid out the elements of sowing and reaping. And with those elements, what we come up with is we have the seed, we have the ground, we have water, we have the season, and we have the harvest and fruit. And each one of these elements has a design, it has a system, it has a process by which things happen. And so we keep referencing the physical reality and the physical process of sowing seeds. And so by design, the seed does what it is, and that's all it can do. A carrot seed cannot produce apples. A carrot seed produces carrots. And that's why it's really important for us to have purpose in our sowing of seeds so that we have intention to reap that which we are sowing. And because, as we talked about last episode, everything you do in your life is a process of sowing and reaping, the more intentional we can be with our actions, the more fruit we will produce that is a benefit not only to us, but to our family, to our community, and to our world. And that understanding, I think, will help us as we move forward with this teaching. The next one is water. Okay, so we went over water. What is water? Now, there is a mystery here that water is your words. Okay, we water with our words. And in order to do that, we have to speak truth. Okay, now there's obviously a lot there. What does it mean to speak truth? Now we went over this again, that we have the difference between faith and lying. Okay, so if I am speaking things that are not as if they are, that can either be in faith or it can be in lying. And for me right now, my understanding is that lying is when I am speaking words without action. I am fantasizing, I am projecting, I am talking about things that I don't really know what I'm saying. So this is something I think we're going to talk about more and more and more, is the power of our words. But I think there's a tremendous amount of power in not saying anything. A lot of your everyday conversation with your spouse or with your family, it kind of tends toward gossip. And I know that the Bible has a lot to say about gossip, but also just in general, I think everyone can be... I think everyone is aware that gossip is not something that we want to take part in, but I think people really, especially in our day and age, don't really understand how detrimental gossip is. And I think the reason that it's so bad for us is that we are speaking about another person, and we are painting a narrative as to what that person is like, what their intentions are, when we have no idea. We are using very limited amount of information to conjure up this image of this person that is usually put in a negative light. And that process, somehow, it really robs us of integrity. I don't really understand it yet, how that works, but like I said, we'll continue to explore it, and something that we want to just keep an eye on. Are you saying things about other people that you don't know if it's true. And are you, not even so much of that, more of like, what is the intention of you talking about this other person? What is the intention of it? Is it to shame them somehow? Is it to make yourself feel better than them somehow? But also the ground is reality, the physical world, and that we need to make sure we have perspective on what's happening within ourselves, within our soul, but also what's happening in reality. And that moves us to understanding the season and what season are you in. Is it time to start a new business? Is it time to start getting your physical health in order? Is it time to start listening to this podcast? Whatever the season of your life that you're in, and it can move. And it also can be a multitude. You can have a season of prosperity in your business, and maybe you have a season that isn't so prosperous in other areas of your life. We'll also kind of explore that too, because I'm not sure if that's really true. I kind of am feeling that maybe this is the season, and that all things fit with underneath this season. That would seem to make more sense. So we'll explore that. And then the last is the harvest and the fruit, and how we harvest, how we store seed for the future, how we partake of the fruit that we've had, how we give away the fruit that we've had. And that really moves us back to the original seed, the seed of sacrifice. And so one thing I want to talk about that I sort of misquoted Jesus, is that in John 12:24, he says, unless the seed dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it brings forth more fruit. And what that means, I mean, if you take a look at that, the seed itself, unless it dies, it remains alone. Okay. Now, if I have an apple seed and I plant it and it produces a tree that produces fruit, that one seed multiplied out into thousands of fruit, thousands of seed that will then multiply out again after generation because of the integrity of the seed. Now, that seed, if it were to anything else, as long as we continue to create the environment for that seed to do what it does to maintain those growing conditions, the seed is going to continue to produce fruit. The potential in the seed is so great. That is the power of the sowing and reaping. However, it has to be maintained within the integrity of the seed. What the seed does is what the seed is. And we need to know that as the cultivators of that seed, as the cultivators of the fruit, we have to understand the season and the time in which we plant it in order for that multiplication to happen. Okay, and then moving from that, then we need to understand too with the harvest what the first fruits are. So talking about the sacrifice, I talked about that we're not sacrificing baby goats or calves or anything like that, but in a sense we are. What does that mean? Well, when we sacrifice something, like I said, we're doing something abnormal. So let's think about what that process of sacrificing that baby lamb does. So you are a farmer and you have a flock of sheep, and the very firstborn of your new sheepfold that spring, your prize sheep, your prize baby sheepy, that sheep you separate out from the flock and you sacrifice it unto God, if you were alive back then. And then you burn the flesh of that animal and nobody eats it. It's just gone. It's 10%. Not 10% in this case, but the first fruits, the firstborn of your flock, off the top, taken as sacrifice. Now, that is an unnatural thing to do. That goes against our nature to take the very first thing, especially the very first best thing, and to render it essentially useless to us, but to have a sacrifice unto God. And so this place of sacrifice here is something, because, and this is what I'm trying to understand here, is that because that is such an unnatural thing to do, there is power in it. It aligns something within your soul when you take that which is very best and you sacrifice it unto God or unto something else. So I talked about the $100 cash. I'm gonna give you $100 cash, and you just immediately found the first person who was in need of $100 cash, and you gave it to them. That sort of unnatural sacrifice has a power, but you could see how it would be much more intense in this scenario with the lamb. So the baby lamb. So when we have a harvest of something, that's why it's really important for us to make sure we take that first fruits and give it back. In my case, giving to church or people in need. Maybe in your case, you can give it to somebody else. But that first fruits is a showing of reverence, of respect, that you understand your relationship to the Creator and also to your fellow beings on the earth. There is a Navajo tradition of when you become a man and you go hunting and you kill your first animal, you have to give everything away. So you give away the animal, you give away your gun or bow and arrow or whatever you shot it with, you give away all of the clothes that you were wearing at the time of the kill. And what this represents is that since you are now a taker of things, you have to be a giver of things. You have to keep that balance. And I think that first fruits, the giving of the first fruits, the sacrificing of the first fruits, creates a harmony within the soul. It creates a harmony within an order. Somehow this giving of 10%, this giving of the first fruits creates an order that is able to help us as we continue to move forward in our lives in peace and prosperity. I know it's a dense nugget there that we're going to continue to explore, this sacrifice, the tithe, the first fruits. Because essentially that's what the podcast is called, Tithe Podcast. So we have that. So going back over seed, ground, water, season, harvest. Okay, so as we move forward, something that I wanted to say as an encouragement, not only to all of you, but to myself as well, because this podcast is not only am I trying to understand this process of sowing and reaping, because I think it's so profound and just it's a foundational principle of not only living as a believer, but also just living in the world, to understand how it works. But also doing this podcast, I am sowing and reaping directly, into myself this knowledge. So I'm going to be giving it out, but I also am expecting to receive more. And so I'm looking forward to the new understandings that I'm going to be getting by continuing to explore these processes. One thing that I think is important for people and myself is the idea of going alone. Abraham in the Old Testament, God speaks to him to sort of kick him out of his father's house, his camp, and makes him go alone. That this life is an adventure, but I think ultimately it's a solitary adventure. We have friends, we have family, we have wives, spouses, children, and we are together, but we are alone. And I think that when I say alone, meaning that you are all knowing, all powerful, and you are also all present to yourself. And you're not that way with anyone else. We're not a Borg. We're not connected in a way in which I know someone else's thoughts. And because of that isolation, that makes us creatures that have a narrative structure to understand the world. And our narrative structure involves the story that we tell ourselves about who we are and who we are in the world. And the first part of that story, a part that some people get to, some people maybe don't, but the part that I think is the most exciting is when you decide, okay, I'm going to go, and I'm going to go alone, and the people that come with me will be there, and the people who don't won't, and there isn't anything that I should do or not do about that fact. And so to just go means that we need to understand the season that we're in, and we need to understand what it is we're trying to accomplish. The end result is not really important. What is important is the increase. Going alone in a commitment to increasing, I think, is where we begin this sort of the story that we're going to tell ourselves now with this sowing and reaping. So we're going to go alone with the intent to increase. And this is exactly what God told to Abraham, that I will make you the father of many nations. Your seeds will be like the stars in the sky. Okay, so this is an ancient story, but it is still playing out within us today. So we're going to leave our father's camp. We're going to go alone with the intent to increase. And this increase is a promise. It is a promise from God. And like I said, if you don't believe in God and you're listening to this podcast, I think that there is still something within you that understands that there are principles and systems that are inherent in the world and in your soul, that when I say that to you, go alone with the intention to increase, that makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense to you, then, please keep listening and maybe we can convince you. So be fruitful and multiply also is what God says to Adam in the garden. So we're going to go alone with the intent to increase, and that increase is a promise. And how do we know that there is a promise of the increase? Well, we look around, look at the natural world, see how everything in the natural world has a function to increase. There is built within it a code, a system that promotes increase. And the things that don't increase, those are the things that go away. The things that do increase, those are the things that remain. And so we want to get into that system of increase so that we can experience that. And that also elevates our soul to experience new things that are really waiting for us. So it's like, now think again of the apple tree. Where are you at in the process? If you were an apple tree, where are you at in that process? What season are you in? Have you even had a first fruit yet? Are you still just a sapling? Or if you have produced fruit, how many seasons of fruit have you produced? 2, 3, 4? What was that fruit like? How many apples were produced? And then what happened with the seed of those apples when they dropped? How many people were able to come and harvest and enjoy your fruit? These are, questions that you can maybe think about as we move on here. So go alone with the intent to increase. The increase is a promise. That promise is where hope is. Okay, so hope is the promise of the increase, the multiplication of your seed. What does that mean? Promise is hope. Okay, so the seed, now if we move into that seed promise of hope, okay, so we're going alone, we have an intention to increase, and we have faith, we have intuitive understanding of the promise. There's an intuitive element within us that is hopeful, and that hope leads us to look toward those things which are good in our life and to move towards them. Okay, this is like crudes. This is like the caveman coming out of the cave. We have a intuitive hope within us. That intuitive hope is the promise of the seed. That intuitive hope is alive in us, and it is making us desire to come out of the cave, come out of the tent, and confront a world in which we do not know, in a world that has many unknowns. Yes, a world that has many unknowns to us. We're going to confront it head on, and we are going to be fruitful and multiply in that world. That is our first step. We're coming out of the tent, we're coming out of the cave, and we're confronting a world that we do not yet know, but we have a hope that is alive in us, and that hope tells us that we can do it, that it is better out there than in the tent. It is better out in the world of unknown than staying in the cave. That process, that emergence is, what is that? That emergence, that confrontation with the unknown is the sacrifice of where the seed dies. That's right. That's where the seeds can die so that they can multiply. And that becomes a very, very exciting and dangerous at times, but ultimately wonderful for us. So thank you for listening to Tithe Podcast. I will talk to you soon.